Hello and welcome to this live and recorded session today to cover what I hope is going to be a really interesting discussion covering would a smartphone ban for under 16s be a preventative mental health intervention? I'm really excited to be joined here by two people that I admire and respect for this really interesting discussion, who are also, particularly in comparison to me in this topic, definitely subject matter experts compared to my concerned parental knowledge that we're bringing today. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Douglas Hamandishe, who is a community mental health practitioner, local councillor for Gillingham North, a broadcaster and former CCIO, and a strong advocate for the power of technology. Douglas has asked really big questions in his broadcasting particularly over the last 6 months. I've been seeing some really big stuff around how can we ensure that the social mobility and opportunities for young people can happen through access to technology. And I'm really looking forward to that element coming into the discussion. I'm also really delighted to welcome Elaine Bousfield, MBE, who's a psychologist best known for her founding a successful tech-enabled mental health company called ZenZone, which is now called Kooth, that many of you should be familiar with. And who's also the founder and CEO of Zuntold, a publishing and mental health delivery company focusing on bibliotherapy and creative writing services, developing and publishing fiction to support people, especially children and young people, with their mental health. That's the tongue twisters out of the way. I'm Liam. I work in the NHS with tech providers around building the right kind of technology as we move into a digital age, trying to address and think about the positives and pitfalls that comes from the choices that we make. I'm also, particularly within the context of this discussion, the parent of a school-aged child, and in that zone where smartphones are starting to play a role and come into this conversation and bring a lot of anxiety in our household as well. And I know Elaine and Douglas, you're both parents of, I think, older children than my own as well, and coming maybe from a slightly different angle. Maybe you've missed the boat a little bit in some of the areas, depending. Great to have you both here for this discussion. I'd like to just set the scene for the discussion and jump in and ask some questions. Today, we're going to be talking about whether a smartphone ban for under 16s could be considered a preventative mental health intervention. Obviously, we've had a lot of discussion around the societal elements, but particularly from those of us who've been working within and around the health service in the mental health area and are thinking about this. To me, this feels like a really interesting time to have this discussion, because over recent months, we've had this, what's been called an accidental movement, started by two parents, has gone viral and started as a local WhatsApp group, which has then grown to a 60,000 and growing by the day strong community of parents advocating for a smartphone-free childhood, calling to ban smartphones and camera phones for under 16s, and also around banning of social media in other parts of the discussion too. Now, often much of the discussion in health and social care talks about the use of technology in improving care itself, often with those arguing against tech kind of being labelled as Luddites or anti-technologists. However, as a technologist, I'm really fascinated about how we can talk about acknowledging that tech comes with consequences and how we can perhaps see tech as being both the poison and the cure in duality. So I'm really looking forward in this discussion to coming to this from a different angle. So let's jump into discussion. So firstly, I'd like to ask you both, it's come out of nowhere, but has it? Does the rapid emergence of this discussion surprise you? What do you think of what's being proposed? I'd like to come to you first.
Yeah, first of all, I'm not a psychologist, just to say, in case people are thinking, oh, how dare she? I'm a counsellor and a person-centred counsellor. I trained in transactional analysis. So yeah, so humanistic counsellor is my background. That's okay, no worries, no worries. It hasn't surprised me. It hasn't surprised me. And in some ways, I wonder why it's taken so long, to be honest. I think you summed it up really nicely. Technology comes, the tech always comes with enormous potential, but always it comes with risks. And that's always been the case. And I remember when I was first setting up our online platform, Kooth, my eldest daughter, as I was doing the research around it before we set it up, my eldest daughter was 12 at the time. Yeah. This is before, I think Google was something like 2 years old. My sort of Facebook hadn't been born, but MySpace was the social network to go to. And she was 12 years old, 13-year-old, and she was using it. And teenagers come with all sorts of insecurities. They're going that age group, between 12 and 14. There's so many changes going on for young people, both physiologically and mentally and emotionally. And I remember her getting really caught up in that kind of fear of missing out and wanting to look really cool and wanting to say the right thing and worrying about things that were being posted back to her. Even then, back in those early days, I knew right from very early on that social networking. We didn't actually call it social networking. I don't think that term had been invented. Had got some misgivings about it. Yeah, so it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me. Yeah, I've got thoughts about what I think we can do about it.
Yeah, definitely. Douglas, over
does that
to
answer
you.
your
Like,
question?
you know, does it surprise you? What are your immediate thoughts about what's being proposed in the public discourse?
Cool. No, it doesn't surprise me. I totally echo Elaine's sentiments there. It doesn't surprise me at all. It's a conversation that needs to be had. As a fellow futurist technologist, Liam, we are always at the pulse, at the cutting edge of technology, and we've seen how best we can leverage that. So Elaine raised a point there about this thing about potential. So what happens when we have the potential of youth meeting the potential of technology? You're going to get exploitation. And if we go back to, I'm older than you, Liam, if I go back to how I was growing up with the BBC Electron, Commodore 64, we maxed out with whatever technology we were given. We took it to its limit. And we were doing things that our parents didn't understand that this technology could do. So a lot of innovation comes out of the creative minds of young people. Let's put that one out there straight away. Where we've seen technology really revolutionize and transform societies, as when social media was like blowing up as a thing, as a mobilization of people type thing. We saw that with the Arab Springs or all across the Middle East. We saw that in 2011 with our own urbanized city-based riots triggered by the shooting of Duggan. And what sprung out of that, young people using Snapchat, they're using BlackBerry Messenger, they were communicating. This was brought to the fore how many conversations were taking place outside of the optics of parents. And that frightened a lot of people because suddenly now the encryption on BlackBerry Messenger became a thing. BBM's encrypted. It wasn't a real thing until kids started having their own conversations and mobilizing and burning things down as it was. It really brought to the fore, and actually was one of the issues that really brought down the BlackBerry Messenger in terms of they had to open up some of this algorithms and stuff like that. So I'm a big believer that yes, parents in the masses are going to be alarmed by this, but if we strip away what we mean by communication or mobile phones just for a second, and get rid of it completely. Forget the mobile phone situation. Are children engaged in conversations outside of the control of parents? Yes or no? I grew up in a time as well, my sisters had secret diaries and they still had the key. And they wrote in there, and I happened to practice how to pick a lock and open it. It's like, oh, hell broke loose. You see what I mean? I didn't read it, but oh, hell broke loose. I have now broken the covenant as a brother to my sisters. I'm never going to be trusted again, private. And they still raise it to this very day. So some of the conversations are going to go in that direction in terms of the ethical standpoint of trying to police and manage what our children are interacting with and engaging with, and also the social freedoms, the mobility issues. But am I surprised? Absolutely not. Very quickly, I know we've got a lot of questions, but very quickly, as a clinician, going back to 2009, 2010, 2011, working in CAMS, acute CAMS, where we have young people coming and presenting with anxiety, depression, early onset schizophrenia, all of this stuff. We had a policy on the ward, a ban on all mobile devices. And I literally had children saying, I'm not going to be admitted onto your ward. I'm not coming in on ward unless I have my phone with me. And then we tried local policies, local protocols to try and manage it. Okay, if you do have your phone, between these times you can access your phone. It became such a bonfire, and we needed more support from the centre in terms of how then do we manage it on a local level. But certainly I've seen young people refusing urgent care related to the mental health because they do not want to let go of their mobile phone, even
which signifies an unhealthy relationship with
they're suffering
with their
through
device.
cyberbullying.
Yeah,
they still don't want to.
Yeah. So, Elaine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's very true. I was just smiling at the young woman who had her own diary. I didn't have an older brother to pick the lock. Thank heavens. But Yeah, it's true. I think, yeah, you raise a lot of really good points there. The importance that, that sometimes young people do need to have recourse to things that is outside their parents' control, especially if there's things going on at home that is really problematic. Sometimes you could argue that technology actually gives those young people a route to escape, gives them a way of being able to express things they might not otherwise be able to express. And that's, I've definitely seen that
of
lots
course,
in my work.
any questions that we go forward and ask around this has to represent the nuance that there's lots of different people who use it for different needs. Like, I have to say, personally, I've come to this with my partner. I've come to it with a degree of a sigh of relief, because we've been watching The Social Dilemma, and we've been reading a book by Gabor Mate, which has really touched us, called Hold On To Your Kids. Actually, it's not by Gabor Mate, it's Gabor Mate and another psychologist, and they've co-written it together. And a lot of it talks about peer dynamics, and basically, that healthy, resilient children are ones who keep that connection with their parents for as long as possible. And we've been sitting there going, well, in this tide of competition where other children can creep into our life in the home, how do we protect our environment? How do we protect the sanctity of our house so we can parent without any distractions or competition going on in that environment? And so we're very relieved that this conversation's come about at this time, and really interesting to see how it's progressed. But I think, Douglas and Elaine, you've both started touching upon the mental health conditions that are presenting, and the growing prevalence of mental health conditions, particularly in children and young people, over the same last decades that we've had the ubiquitous growth of smartphones. Now, this will be an area that you'll both be familiar with in your respective work in mental health, but more or less within the timeframes, we've seen this huge leap in anxiety and depression, and we've seen statistical changes in suicide rates amongst young people at a very similar time that we've had the emergence and proliferation of social media and smartphone use, given, for example, that 97% of over 12s are expected to own a smartphone nowadays. How related do you think these events are, and how concerned do you think that we should be? Elaine? No.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, I think we should be concerned. We should be concerned. I think there are some real negatives about. Okay, it's not the technology that's the problem, really. It's how it's used, and it's who's controlling it, really. That's the problem, I think. So it's not that young people can have access to information. I was talking to my daughter's a teacher, and many of the children she teaches, their family don't have many computers in the house. They might have one laptop shared between a family, but homework has to be done using technology through Google Classroom. So many of her children, many of her students actually do their homework on their mobile phone, and then they upload it onto Google Classroom. So if you were to say we have to that children from 12 onwards shouldn't be allowed to have a smartphone, that's going to cause lots of problems, lots of kind of practical problems, and actually would probably increase inequality even more. And the other thing I'd say to you is, in the last 20 years, inequality has grown rapidly, and the gap between rich and poor has grown rapidly. And the 99% of the wealth is concentrated in 1% of the population. That in itself is a problem. Our economy has become more insecure. Our world has become more insecure. There's lots of things going on in young people's lives that follow the same trajectory as the growth of the smartphone. That's not to say I don't think there are problems with smartphones and the way that they are being used. And I think that is where we need to be having a discussion. So I think, yes, I think younger people, especially those under the age of 16, but I'd probably say those under the age of 25, actually, our brains haven't evolved to cope with this, with the kind of constant scrolling and the constant being bombarded by images and videos. And it's not good for our brains. We're overstimulated. Children are losing the ability to concentrate, to reflect, and it's the dopamine effect. It's addictive. There's an addiction built into the programs, the things that are put onto that smartphone, and that's where the problem lies. I think not in the technology itself. And so I would argue that we probably need a big public health initiative. I think we need to sit around the table. We need to work how do we want to educate parents and children on how the smartphone should be used and when it should be used, and to I think it's such a shame. There's just so much technology's got so much potential to do so much good, and it is doing so much harm. TikTok actually is very interesting because, of course, you've got Book Talk on TikTok, which has seen an increase in young people reading books, which is great. But it's got so much else that's wrong with it. We've got to do something about that. I think it's more about who's controlling the technology, what's being put on it, and are we educated?
Yeah, and like we've obviously got to unpack the fact that, like, you know, when I pick up my mobile phone, there are things that I know as a 40-year-old man, I have things that I know I get addicted to. YouTube is a dangerous thing for me. And watching at 11 o'clock before I go to bed is not going to help me sleep very well. And it's going to make me grumpy in the morning with my family. And I'm susceptible perfectly, as I imagine all of us are in this kind of era as well. We've got social media, we've got algorithmically driven things, but someone in the comments before the session said, well, actually, like, I worry about it, but I also want my daughters to use the period tracking app that they can use in order to be able to empower them in certain ways as well. And so the problem is it's a bucket of good technology and problematic technology that sits in a box, and we go, should we ban this box of the things in it? Douglas, I know you're going to have a number of comments on a number of these elements here, particularly around the social mobility side of things, but I've definitely got a killer question on that topic slightly later on as well. So I just want to go back, like, how related do you think the events are? You know, when we unpack it like Elaine's described, like, how concerned do you think that we should be?
I think a lot of research needs to be done in terms of this correlation. It could be coincidental. One thing I do know from experience is children typically need a device so that they can form connections, have validation and acceptance. And some of these things are just being played out on a device. If it wasn't mobile, it would just be a computer. It's a computer in a mobile casing. So as technology becomes more advanced, that's mobile phone, I'm pretty confident in the next 5 years, becomes so small, you will not be talking about a smartphone. It might be smart glasses or something else. It might not be the phone as such. Either way, when you've got young people looking to connect, I think that the issue that I'm seeing from my vantage point is we have evolved as human beings, but not at the same rate as the technology. So even as a parent, there are many parents now going through divorce because they were the Facebook generation, and things were said online that triggered a divorce between the parents. We as adults even are struggling to reconcile the technology. There's gambling addictions. Elaine, I'm so glad you talked about the dopamine rush, which comes out of need to find and discover things. And you can find and discover things, and that triggers the dopamine. But the things that some children are finding are very harmful, triggering the dopamine that exacerbates the mental health. The question is this: if we use validation, acceptance, and connection and park them on one side, and they talk about mental health, what was happening before technology, these children were suffering in silence. They couldn't connect to other people that were going through similar things as themselves, or find it extremely difficult. I'm from the generation where I had to go to the phone box, put my 50p in, and hope. Remember, Childline came about through children not being able to express themselves, suffering at home, and there was a number. And the advertisement, I can see as clear as the day, the child was going to a phone box and doing that. So there's something about enabling young people to have access to good apps that support them, but also we need to be thinking about legislation to really police some of these harmful apps that are available. And that's something that is at governmental level we need to take a look at on an international basis, because young kids are so cheeky. I was working on the ward the other day and tried to police a young person around what they're accessing, and she was already using a VPN. And I guarantee you, her parents know nothing about these virtual private networks that they put on their phone to allow them to access things. So there's a big re-educational piece, I would say, that needs to take place to support the use of technology. But I'm a big believer, though, by banning anything, young people will feel, in young person vernacular, triggered. if there's a ban, and they'll gravitate to it a lot more. So I think it's about being able to create an environment where the technology is used in a safer space, and that will give opportunities to new industries that need to emerge to make sure that these apps are safe. People really know, parents know how to support their children in using it. At the moment, we buy the phone and we're left to.
I'd like to plant a flag in the opposite pole for the sake of. I would say it's for the sake of devil's advocacy, but I'd say it's actually just my opinion on this. I suppose when you buy one of these phones, you can't delete YouTube off it. You can't delete the things that are tracking. Like, I absolutely, like, as a technologist, I absolutely believe that we should be enabling our children with tools in order to become creators in the future age. But at the same time, I can't help but be entirely and utterly convinced that the social media element that we have on this, whether this be YouTube, and we've seen from Social Dilemma, and we've seen from the recent US congressional discussions that have been happening as well around the fact that nothing is being done by these big tech companies to protect children from going to very concerning and harmful content. And I suppose, like, I love YouTube. Like, I sat with my son the other day and he's into breakdance and stuff. So I was showing him like breakdancing video, different dance styles. And that was great because I was there and I was controlling it. We sit down and do Duolingo together, with me, with him, or my partner with him. But the problem is that there's some kids down the road and they think YouTube is the best thing. And their parents have no control over what they're seeing. And I've seen some of the things. My son's come back and said, "Oh, I watched this video and he had this." And I'm like, I don't want you watching that. And I don't know how to stop you from watching that when it becomes a cultural norm. And so for me, I think that the problem that I see, and the thing that really concerns me, is that with these boxes, we have something where we cannot take away the things that the tech companies who build these things as well hugely profit from, and that then become the things that can effectively, if we think about increase of shootings in the US school system, we think about a number of these different areas about kids going into hate materials and then going and enacting that out in the real world. For me, it really concerns me. And I can't speak, I'm not a mental health practitioner. I can't speak on behalf of mental health, but I absolutely agree in a digital world, we need to have digital relationships. But at the moment, this to me feels synonymous with unregulated and potentially toxic and problematic algorithmically driven relationships, which does worry me. And I can't see how that's good for children. So, yeah, so that's me planting mine on the other side of things, because I see there's definitely positives and negatives, but yeah, it does worry me. So obviously we both, Elaine and Douglas, you both suggested that we need to do something, like there needs to be some kind of form of intervention. If we take away, I suppose, the discussion around a smartphone-free childhood and the banning of it because of the risks and the safeguarding risks and so on, and the opportunities that come with technology, before we start talking about the intervention as prevention, what is the intervention? Where's the problem, and what's the way that we wrap around to stop that problem happening? Elaine, over to you.
Yeah, it's really, you said about cultural norms, and I think that's really important that you mentioned cultural norms, because I think in some ways the technology is, in the last 20 years, it's just gone so quickly and so fast, and we are a little bit like a group of kids with their noses pressed against a sweet shop and being told everything's there for free, and we've gotten, in a way, we've become quite gluttonous, really, without thinking about the long-term damage we might be doing to our bodies or our minds. For me, I think if you take something away, you've got to give something in to replace it, and that's the difficulty. I know that I think there are certain things we could do that I know is already happening. I know that schools, for example, have banned the use of phones in schools, and they have noticed, and they've reintroduced things like whole school reading to the class. And kids have begun to connect with each other in the playground rather than sitting there all on their phones at playtime. They're actually interacting with each other and talking to each other, which is great. That's because there are other ways to connect. We don't always have to connect through technology. It's good to connect physically in the here and now as well. So I think in terms of what can be done, you're right. You're up against huge technology companies, aren't you? I do honestly think that the only answer is to get young people on side and have those those really important discussions to try to shift the cultural norms a bit more, so that in a sense, if we think about smoking, for example, when I was growing up, when I was a child in the 1970s, I used to go to the end shops to buy my mum cigarettes for her. Nobody ever questioned why was a 9-year-old going to buy fags for her mum. That was what we did. Nobody. And then we started seeing those health warnings on cigarette packets, didn't we? And smokers, a lot of them moaned about having their rights taken away. The tobacco companies definitely didn't like them. But gradually what's happened over time with smoking is that we have all become a lot more aware of the dangers of cigarettes. Now, there is going to be a rule which says if you're not allowed to, I think there's going to be a year where you're not allowed to buy them anymore, and that'll be interesting to see how that happens. I don't think we should do that with technology, because there's too much good stuff in technology to remove it completely, and I think we'd be on a hiding to nothing. So I guess it might sound really naive perhaps, but I do believe in the role that public health can play in terms of, let's sit down, let's get around a table, let's build a 20-year strategy for how are we going to manage the role of technology in our children's lives, and to get the kids on board with those discussions as well.
I'm going to chuck an audience comment in before I hand over to Douglas, because I've got kids need to be kids for longer. I love that we've got an audience who's putting comments in. It's great. They need to incorporate boredom in their lives. All tech at the moment prevents this. As a parent of 2 boys, 7 and 5, I love to allow kids to become bored, as it allows them to be creative. I'm a very hands-on dad and will always play an active part in their lives. Often there are a lot of parents who rely on tech to almost parent their kids, as it's often an easier option. In my opinion, parents need to be educated on this subject in more detail in order to support their children going forwards, which I think plays to what you were discussing, Elaine, as well. So maybe that provides a bridge over to Douglas's comments.
Yes.
No, and it's a great comment as well. And again, echoing much of what Elaine is talking to, I can speak directly to that as well. If we could do a bit of, I think, as a creative futurist, I can also be a bit future gazing, right? Because as we know, in the transformational space that we're in, sometimes a business case is really obsolete because the technology moves so fast ahead, right? So having this it's going to be an ongoing conversation that you need the brightest of minds to be up to date with what's happening, because you know how slow the center moves. By the time you got corralled the right people in the room, technology has gone so far forward. So that's what I'll say about that. But it's certainly something that we need to be doing, absolutely 100%. With social media and technology, we're trying to break down the core components of what we're complaining about, or what we are really challenged with. It's not so much the communication piece, meaning you can communicate with somebody else through this device. So I can tell mommy and daddy I'm on the way home, right? Because without that, many parents will stop their children traveling home by themselves anyway. They need to have some way of communicating a message, okay? That is what goes on top of that device. And we're talking about then platforms, social media, all that kind of stuff that for years have not been policed. They've been policing themselves. So that's where we've got a problem. Social media, as we know, is just like water. It could be solid, liquid, and gas. At the moment, we're seeing it in the state of an app on your mobile phone. But it could very much be on your television. TVs are smart devices are literally everywhere now. So if it's a conversation that's taking place in terms of what are these young people doing on these apps, these addictive, dopamine-driven technologies, it affects adults just as much as it affects young people. We need a holistic view at that. Cultural norms needs to be discussed, as Elaine was alluding to. We in the West have got this technology and we're using it in this way. And as we've seen in the US, it's affecting their culture in a very negative way, hence the TikTok and all that kind of stuff's coming about. If you look at the developing world, or the world countries that are catching up, what is their relationship with the mobile phones and the young people? Because a lot of it still is, children still need access to good parenting, one-to-one parenting, reading every night with their child, going on walks, access to fresh air, all of these stuff. But we are now in a post-COVID environment, and the children do more based upon what they see the parents doing, opposed to what the parent actually says. So if a child is looking at daddy and mummy and they're seeing mummy stressed out on a Zoom call, yeah, engaging in the house, still working. She knows that this device in the hand also can make money. This device in the hand also makes my mum engage in conversations with other people, etc., etc. Why not me? The work is encroached in the home for many people, and then we're going to turn around and tell children, actually, you stay away from this. It's a bad thing. So children, that's where the contradiction happens. The mummy, daddy, why are you doing something that we know is bad in the first place? You are stuck on the machine all day long. I've seen parents swiping left, swiping right. I was watching Lucy's talking, a dating piece of information where they're saying people are not able to date anymore in person because of the swiping culture. You see something you don't like, you swipe it. And I got thinking, the other day I was on a train all the way to Manchester, and I saw a child looking out the window. This child must have been between, I think, 5 and 7. We got past some countrysides and scenes, and basically there were cows in the field. And he had this device on his lap, right? iPad on his lap, rubberized case, all that kind of stuff. But what this child was doing, he was trying to swipe away at the cows on the window. And I'm thinking, how are we getting to a stage now where we have young people that don't know the relationship between the real world and the digital, when so much of what we do is done in the digital realm and not in the real physical realm itself? Therein lies a bigger challenge. TV is dead for these. Sorry, the last point. Sorry, TV is dead for these young people. I grew up coming home at a particular time to watch Granger, Top the Pops, all that kind of stuff. There was a particular order. Children don't watch TV anymore. It's dying. Even Netflix is dying. Hence the TikTok phenomena. People rather go on TikTok, get instant dopamines than Netflix. So everything is moving at such a pace that we really need, like I said, the brightest minds at cutting edge stuff. And the mic drop moment is just coming now. Hear me out, Liam, and hear me out, right? As a creative futurist, while we are talking about the children, AI is looking past our children. What do I say? As we are looking and concerned about our children, the advances in AI are looking beyond our children. That's the danger we're in now. And until we really reconcile that.
Although I think if there's one lesson we learn from how governments and states think, they don't think 10 years in advance. They respond to something that should have been dealt with 5 to 10 years ago, right? And that is the ever-going story that we have. I think there's a lot to unpack in this. And I think, look, what I'm definitely hearing and feeling is that there is a distinction between technology and the value of technology, of which I'm totally with you on this. But then there is also around the fact that within the technology, there are these large companies who basically are pretty much unregulated. Obviously, EU is starting to look at some of the developments around this, and I'd be really interesting to see what the EU does. Oh, if we'd only stayed, that's another day. But in terms of these companies who can, like, it's very easy for a child to get to violent conspiracy theories, sort of racist, like all of your isms are available on YouTube. And if you just click the wrong thing, the algorithm will push you closer and closer until you go further and further down that rabbit hole. And I think the other final element that I think is being discussed here is around design. Who designs what we have? So these things are being designed to be addictive. Like, we're all probably addicted more than we should be. And there's these different things that we as adults can't deal with. It's interesting because I feel like one of my most awful feelings generally in a week is if we've been very clear with our son, and then I've just been caught on something on LinkedIn and I'm there and I'm like a zombie. And I'm like, I get myself out of it. I'm like, this is the word. Like, I'm teaching him to become a zombie in the future, to just stare at a screen and watch 3-minute TikTok videos so he gets dopamine hits, which is definitely very concerning around this. But if we as adults are so susceptible to this, what hope do children have? What chance do children have? If we, with all of our maturity and rationality, can't face this off, how does an 11-year-old make the right choices regardless of what education, given that there are certain things on these phones that are being designed for addiction? They are being designed to make us use more and be advertised to, and to pick up more data and to all of this kind of stuff. How I'll chuck it to either of you, whoever's got the biggest thought on this, really. Like, how do we do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a very good question. I wish I had an easy answer, because I think you're right. 11-year-olds can't. They're physiologically, their brains aren't developed. We've evolved to be anxiety. We're very driven by anxiety as a species, human beings. But children haven't got they haven't developed the brains are still developing. Their brains are just like plastic, really. They're just there to be molded, and that's, like Douglas said right at the very beginning, that means exploitation becomes very easy. That's the problem. And you're right, the big companies are there to make money, and they exploit. They build in addiction. So what can we do about it? I don't know. Would it be possible to maybe it's the internet that needs to evolve. Maybe it's the internet that needs to change, because at the moment anything can be accessed through the phone. So do we need stricter controls around? It's almost film ratings or book ratings. Do we need to have channels that are age rated that are not available to
Would that,
you
for example, be like, what
age?
if we TikTok as an 18?
Yeah.
Or like,
exactly. Yeah, if we rate something like TikTok and 18.
Oh, but we believe that they're adults and they can go out there and get drunk in a phone box and drive their cars into walls and all kinds of stuff that when I was 18, like
you get married.
I have regrets.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you probably did lots of things. Yeah, you don't want your children to do. I mean, this is the problem. But then, of course, you then run into which echo chamber do you want to subscribe to? That's the issue, isn't it? Really, has always been with us, sadly. Racism has always been with us, sadly. Do we make it better by not seeing it or by not witnessing it? I don't know. It's a tricky one. But I think maybe some sort of age. As long as you don't run into too far into in America, you've got a lot of book banning that goes on. If they think a book's not Christian enough, or if they think a book's talking about being brought up by gay parents, then that's banned. So they would argue they're protecting their children's brains. I would argue they're not. But so it's which echo chamber do you want to sign up to? But I'm sure there are some areas where we could all agree and draw a line in the sand. We would say we really don't think children are ready to have access to this information. It's difficult though, because going back to something Douglas said earlier as well about parents, some of the games that I remember when my son was a teenager, he was really into gaming, and some of the games that came out, like Grand Theft Auto? And I just said to him, "You're not having that game. There's no way on earth you're having that game." But 3 of his mates had it. Yeah, and it's all so he still got to see it. There's no. But I think we can definitely put in some guidelines and some cultural norms and some ground rules that we can all agree on, which at least gives our children a framework in which they can operate within. And I do think banning smartphones in schools, so you're there for the school day and you're fully present there for the school day, Douglas, is a good move. Yeah.
Yeah, great points, Elaine. I would just add to that in the sense that these echo chambers are just a continuation of conversations that are not taking place in schools. So I think when we talk about re-educating the educators, it's all about that. If racism is still prevalent and children are going to school, how are we teaching children about race? How are we teaching children about misogyny? A lot of these echo chambers are there because children, or even adults even, want answers that either they're too scared to have the discourse in public. That's why it's there as a lowering thing. There's one thing that's clear for me. These children now, they're the online generation. They've never known a time not being online. There's anything everywhere at once. They can get answers to questions just for asking the right prompt. That is their generation. I'm the generation who had to go to the library and the book was checked out. I had to wait for the information to come back. Yeah. Everything's so instantaneous now. So to prevent children from having access to these answers, either we as the older generation are prepared to have difficult conversations with our children to prepare them for Actually, if you go, you don't need to go down the rabbit hole on YouTube about this, because we've already had that conversation as a family. So what if Johnny has two dads? It means this. I can assure you, children are so mischievously and curious about the world. It's an indictment on us as parents, mostly, when that happens. Also, there's this question about the Western culture, which at the moment I feel is cannibalizing itself in terms of, you've got the technology and we're going backwards with it. When developing countries are crying out for the technology and they'll do something. What is different about somebody coming from a developed world that might still have access to the same apps? Why are their children potentially, I don't know, it's a hypothesis, not falling down the same addictive traps as the Western children? Because if we cannot reconcile that, what will happen is there's going to be a power shift, a dynamic, where developing countries will rise up a lot quicker because these children will be a lot more savvy and a lot more aware of what this technology can do and what it can do. And my last point I will leave on this one point is just you, Liam, as well. You got a son, right? Correct. Would you say that the way you raise your son would be exactly the same in terms?
I'll find out in September, mate. That's
if you had another son or another daughter. Oh, well done. In advance.
Of course.
In advance, because children come with different personalities, different temperaments. So one child can really use the technology and use it in a positive way. Another child, as a parent, you got addictive personality. You cannot be left unattended. So just thinking about it from that context, that not every child is susceptible to the same things online. There's nuance to that.
I think there's, sorry, I just quickly say, I think there's certain public health messages we can share with parents around the introduction of technology at young ages. So all the research, for example, shows that physical books, are far more important to a child than an iPad. So sitting down with your child, even if you're not a great reader yourself, sitting down with your child and looking through a picture book from when they're babies. I'm talking about when they're 6 months old. These lovely cloth books you can buy, or to actually sit down with your child and
books
look at a book
coming through.
Is an enormous bonding activity, really important for that child's brain development and for your relationship with the child. And you don't get that with a screen. And all the research, there's been lots of research into this already. There's already a wealth of research out there which demonstrates. I mean, I was just reading this lady called Jean Twang, who's written about the I generation. She's a psychologist, and there's a couple of other psychologists she's worked alongside, which have analysed all the data around poor mental health and the rise of the smartphone. And there is a correlation, a very powerful correlation, and we would be foolish to say there isn't a problem, there isn't something that needs looking at there. I think it's an interesting challenge for us. And in some ways it's an exciting challenge, because what it might end up doing is it might end up to lead us to develop even better technology in the future.
I hope so, because I think on the topic of, I suppose, the design of technology, if, for example, we take YouTube, right, and we say that there is videos which promotes good, healthy information that we can receive, and we go out and actively seek it, we'll play that video to our son if we want to explain something. Like at the moment, he's learning about, the Isambard Kingdom, Brunel, and Brunel's his hero, and we show him a video about Brunel, and he used maths to do this and stuff like that. But I suppose the problem that I see is there are groups. So if we take, for example, the US anti-abortion movement that's going on over there at the moment, it's a very well-funded evangelical group that is funding advertising for the balance to be tipped. So if you look at a particular couple of videos around this, there's a possibility that it will find itself into your feed, and then once you've watched that video, you will then be taken down a rabbit hole where it will be presented as information and truth and so on. And that once you started doing that, and I did an experiment, I cleared out my YouTube and I started watching some select videos to see how quickly I would get to serious misinformation, like an online, very careful my language, which I should be anyway, but like an online sort of sort of hateful, misogynist mainstream group. And it was very quick that I could see that promoted content, and I clicked on some of it to see, and then it took me to a bit, and then that became my feed. And it was amazing how a couple of clicks changed that. And so I think in terms of design, that is what, as a parent, it just takes like, as Douglas says, a cheeky, curious kid. And I've got a kid who will ask. He will come and he'll come back from the friend's house and say, "Mum, Dad, I'm not sure if they let me watch this." And he'll come back home and he'll say, "Can I watch this?" And be like, "Yeah, you can watch this." And we'll send him back. But your kids test boundaries and so on. And all it takes is a click, and then suddenly that goes in there. And that scares me. It genuinely scares me. That is what I'm competing against as a parent.
Right. Yeah. But you know what? I think, and I would be scared too. I think you're right to raise this. And I think as a country, we should be scared as well, because it also obviously opens us up to all sorts of exploitation from people that would gladly like to see
Russian actors, China, who are funding this stuff, and companies are taking money for this. It's tipping the scale. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. And of course, it's that's because those technology companies do not operate within a moral framework, within a culturally acceptable moral framework, and that's the issue. The question is, what do we do if we've got a lot of social media being run by people who don't have the right kind of ethical moral framework, which is that these are opinions, they should be stated as opinions. The news can't always be trusted. There are some very dangerous echo chambers out there. There's liberal echo chambers as well. And it's important, I think, as somebody that's who's my political, I'm left of centres, my personal political viewpoints, and so there's certain newspapers I read, there's certain places I go to get my news first of all. So it's the Guardian's the thing I mainly read, but it's also really important I also read other people's views, because that's important. Otherwise, you're not very educated if you don't. But there is a problem with it, with the algorithms and the way it works. Do we take those companies to task? Do we say you have got to change? Or do we turn around and say, well, we're not going to buy the box that they sit on unless you do change? And I think that's the issue.
And if truth, who decides who truth is? Because I'm going to be honest, I'm just as concerned of Jacobs Rees-Mogg and Suella Braverman deciding what truth is as well. Not that they're going to probably have very long to decide that before, obviously, the administration likely changes. But they are
representative. They're representative of thousands and thousands of people. So Trump is that man could very dangerously become president.
Should
again,
Trump decide what truth is? Like, he's got truth media, so he must know what truth is, right?
Should Trump, that before. So it's about all echo chambers about how do we draw the guidelines? How do we draw the ground rules? How do we say this is how we want to define how technology could be used in the future? How do we put warnings on everything? There must be. We're a really creative, intelligent species. There will be answers to this.
Douglas,
we just need to somehow work out what they are.
If I could just come in there very quickly, I'm totally agreeing both your sentiments there. Absolutely. Intention is another word that I always use when it comes to technology. What is the intention behind a company existing, the algorithms that they're putting out, and the sole purpose of the app? What is the intention behind it? And that gives rise to the dopamine and all that kind of the business models around it. If we have sight of those things, then we can start doing something about it. But let's not sugarcoat this whole situation. One person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. Where, as Liam talks about this whole, where does truth start and where does it turn into a lie? Somewhere on the spectrum, there's the center ground. But even then, it cannot be centrist all through every situation. There's some things in terms of where I conduct my life might be considered right wing. There were some things might be considered ultra left. We fluctuate on this. So to police a news or media company, it's going to be very difficult, particularly if they're based outside of our own shores. We're then going to be imposing our yet clearly defined values on another country, which we can't actually do.
No, I agree. I think it's more about with mainstream media, that the Guardian's going to have a slightly left-wing liberal interpretation of events. The Telegraph's going to have is going to be more right of centre. You know what these brands stand for before you read them. The Daily Mail is going to be, exactly. They are regulated. So that's the difference. So it's almost as if like you know what you're going to get when you go to visit a particular brand, but you don't get that with YouTube.
So
you don't get that with TikTok.
Just mindful of time for the end. Like, so what is, because obviously we're trying to talk about, is there an intervention? What is the intervention? I think we can all probably agree that there is this wild west of content, and there's certain content we don't want children to see, and so on. So in terms of smartphones, there's pros and cons that, you know, that you can sit with smartphones. But actually, I think a lot of what we're talking about as being the most dangerous stuff is the stuff which is the dangerous stuff on the smartphones. So let me put it to this. As an intervention, if we can't decide Suella Braverman or what is hate crime in Scotland and all of this different stuff where we can't do, like the society, we can't agree what is truth and what is hate and what is appropriate and inappropriate, should we potentially wait until a certain age, until people, like young people, can access this stuff on their own, or at least try and set a cultural intention so profit-based, algorithmically generated media does not become the public place that children are immersed in? Let me ask that as a question.
Okay, so my response to that would be banning the smartphone to children under the age of 16 wouldn't be the way I would go. My intervention would be education, public health, would be that approach.
Okay, I'm agreeing with that, public health, education. And also, if you take a look at what a 16-year-old can or cannot do, they go backwards for a second. If you're 12 years old, you can be classified as Gillick competent, and you can decide on which parent you want to live with, etc., etc. So there's a scale of maturity that goes down, further down than 16. And equally so, there's a scale of maturity that goes up to that 21 that is still ambiguous as well. You might be able to have sex, but not allowed to buy a sex product. It's all of these ambiguities that are around these age ranges. And so it's very complicated. But I was certainly with Eileen on that one in terms of education, re-education, and real enforcement of these apps. Because I don't think it's the mobile device as per se, because in our lifetime, the mobile phone is going to disappear. It's going to move into maybe in your skin, in your glasses. It's going to move. So it's the apps. It's these applications that have a very addictive algorithm that is causing these addictions. And I think we need more truth. We need more public discourse like this. So thank you, Liam, for setting this up. I've learned a lot. It's made my brain do this. As my son walked in. Again, how many people have walked in?
Absolutely.
On Zoom calls?
Yeah. And it comes down to this, right? These are complex discussions and debate, educated debate, rather than just polarization on left and right and everyone shouting at each other, which is, to be honest, in some senses, the world that we live in often. Every time I put a post on LinkedIn, I'm scared someone's going to shout at me. And we do have a shouting culture at the moment. And through open, I think it's probably fair to say that I probably have a very different view of this to Douglas. I think Elaine, you're probably somewhere slightly in, but probably more on the Douglas side. I still feel I would ban social media for under 16s entirely, to take away the cultural norm, to not have to put the pressure onto the parents. And that would be my continued position. However, we've got to keep talking about this topic in a way that doesn't just make this something that we can delete and go, oh, no, that's too extreme. We just do nothing. We've got to do something in the middle, right? Because there are ills and there are benefits to technology. And we can't just think about them as one or the other, right? Right. Thank you so much for joining for this discussion. It's been a real pleasure. And enjoy the rest of your day. Have a lovely, wonderful Monday. It's Monday, right? A lovely, wonderful Monday, the rest of your day. Take care, everyone.